It's time for another episode of the Global Meditation Podcast. This weekly show features explorations of spiritual and paranormal topics with a focus on bridging the physical and metaphysical, bringing deeper meaning to our individual and collective lives. And now here's your host, Darby Miller.
Hello and welcome to the Global Meditation Podcast. My name is Darby Miller. For this interview, I had the pleasure of speaking with remote viewer Angela Ford. Angela Dellafiora Ford was born and raised in Western Pennsylvania. She received a bachelor's degree in political science from the Indiana University of Pennsylvania. For over 32 years, she worked for the intelligence community in Washington, D.C. While working for the Defense Intelligence Agency, Angela participated in the now famous psychic phenomenon program Stargate and worked as a remote viewer in that program for 9 years. You can read Angela's complete bio in the description for this video or podcast audio. I had previously listened to 2 interviews with Angela and found out that while she worked as a remote viewer in the Stargate program, she often used a process called automatic writing to complete some of her best work. I invited Angela onto the podcast to talk more about how she initially learned automatic writing, find out more about how she used this process while in the Stargate program, and to find out more about what she's up to now with automatic writing and other psychic processes. So without further ado, let's transition to the recorded interview. I hope you enjoy it. Hi, Angela. It's wonderful to have you here for the podcast. I'm a big fan of your work. I first found out about you through some video interviews you did with New Thinking Aloud with Deborah Lynn Katz, which was mostly about your experience as a remote viewer in the project Stargate Army Remote Viewing Unit, which ran from 1986 to 1995, as far as your involvement with it. Mm-hmm. Also had you listen to you on an interview with Daz Smith on his Friday night Zoom chats, and they were wonderful interviews. And one of the things that really caught my ear was the fact that you used automatic writing in the Army Remote Viewing Unit, and you had some amazing hits, and we can discuss some of those. I think that someone dubbed your methodology as WRV, or written remote viewing, and I thought, man, we really need to hear more about this. I'm really interested in finding about how you got into automatic writing before your entrance into the Army Remote Viewing Unit, find out a little bit more about how you used it during your time in the unit, and find out about how you're using it now and what you're up to. So thanks again. Let's start in the beginning. How did you first get involved with automatic writing?
Okay, well, first of all, I want to thank you for having me on your podcast. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Okay. Well, from the beginning, I think when I was a very, very young child, I would have out-of-body experiences. And this was before I went to school, but I remember having out-of-body experiences. And I can remember as I was getting more at like 6, 7, and 8, I can remember having prophetic dreams. I can remember having dreams and then they would come true. Now, I had a twin sister. She died in 2014, but she was the same way. She had out-of-body experiences and she had dreams. Now, I would tell my mother about the dreams that I had, and my mother was very encouraging. She didn't scare me about the dreams that I had. She would listen to them. So I would say that I had these abilities at a young age. Now, then I got involved in school and I got involved in life. And so I feel like the abilities kind of went away, but sometimes they were there intuitively. Sometimes they were there. Sometimes they weren't. But what I did is I graduated. I'm from Western Pennsylvania. I'm from Indiana County, which is near Pittsburgh. And I went to school at Indiana University of Pennsylvania, and I majored in political science. And my sister majored in criminology. When we came out of college, my sister wanted to be a cop, but she encouraged me to be a policeman with her. So we were waiting for the Pennsylvania State Police Academy to open up for new recruits. Well, in the meantime, we were looking for jobs, but we couldn't find a job. So what I did is I was working at night at a Holiday Inn as a waitress, and then I went to the Poconos to work. So what happened was I really didn't have a job in my major. I was kind of floating around. So what happened was the police academy was not opening up for several more years. And there was a cop that we met at the Poconos. My car was stolen, and he helped me find it. He told my sister and I we should go to the FBI in Washington, D.C. That's how I came into Washington. I started working at the FBI. But once I got accepted at the FBI, I had to undergo a clearance. So as I was waiting for my clearance, there was a college professor named Dr. Carl Bordis, he taught chemistry, but he also taught a night class called ESP, Extrasensory Perception. And since I was waiting for my clearance and I didn't have much to do, I took the night class because I was very interested in the subject. So I took his night class. Well, then what happened was I got a job at night. I had to go work in a factory. So I quit the class so that I could go. I needed the job so I could make money to move down to Washington, D.C. But I stayed in contact with Dr. Bordis. We sort of became a little friendly, but not that friendly because I wasn't able to finish out the class. Well, I came down to Washington, D.C., and I started to work at the FBI, and my ability started to come back. I felt like I was getting the dreams, the out of body again. And the FBI, as it turned out, I didn't have the eyesight to be an agent. I didn't have the in-depth vision in my left eye. And I didn't know what I was going to do because the FBI didn't pay that much money. So I was working with a woman named Sue, and she left the FBI to go work for her husband, who worked for Army Intelligence. So she called me up after she left, and she said, you should apply to Army Intelligence. They're looking for people with political science degrees. They'll give you an internship. So I applied. I was hired by Army Intelligence. I received some raises, and I was on an internship for 3 years. Now, during that time, during that time, my mother called me up one evening, and her friends were looking for something to do. My mother liked to take night classes. So I told her to take the night class with Dr. Bordis, the ESP class. So that's what she did. In the meantime, I was working for Army Intelligence, and my father died, and I must have been 29 or 30 years old, but my father passed away with a heart attack. It was very sudden. I had a very difficult time with my father's death, but my mother was taking the ESP class, and she sent me a book, and she said, Angela, read this book. She said, it will help you understand your father's death. And she said, I think it will help you. So she sent me this book, and it was by Ruth Montgomery, and it was called A World Beyond. And Ruth Montgomery was a well-known spiritualist, medium, fortune teller in the 1970s. She wrote quite a few books. And I read her book, and she did automatic writing or written channeling, whatever you want to call it, mediumship. So I really resonated with this book. I just resonated with it. And I said, and I can remember reading the last word of the book. I must have devoured the book in 1 or 2 days, but I put down the book and I said, if she can do automatic writing, I'm going to do it. So I picked up a pen and I started to do automatic writing. Now, it was very gentle how it came. There weren't too many messages, but over time, I was receiving a lot of messages about my family, members of my family. I was receiving messages about my relatives that have passed on. So I was doing this I had started this automatic writing, and my sister started it too. And I think we were doing automatic writing for about a month or 6 weeks. And my sister was taking an astrology class at the time, and her teacher told her, she said she understood what my sister and I were doing, but she sort of geared us to go to the Mansbridge Institute in Alexandria, Virginia. It was run by a man by the name of Fred Mansbridge, who was a psychic intuitive. He had some commercial success. So we started to take classes with him. And I started to take some night classes with him and some psychic classes with him. And I learned a lot from him. And so did my sister. Well, in the meantime, I'm working at Army Intelligence. Well, there was the military, they always, they rotate. The military people don't stay in one place. They're always given orders to go someplace else. Well, while I was working for INSCOM in the early 1980s, there was a new general that came in to take command, and his name was General Stubblebine. Well, then I heard that he was looking for people with abilities because that's what he did. I guess the Army remote viewers fell under him. The remote viewers at that time were under the command of Army Intelligence, which was then run by General Stubblebine because he took over. So I had heard about this remote viewing program. And they said that he was looking for people that had the abilities. So I met with him through people that I knew. They gave me the introduction, and he knew I had the abilities, and I channeled for him. Now, what happened was, this must have been around 1983 or 1984, because General Stubblebine retired in 1984. I think he lost his support from the Joint Chief of Staff over at the Pentagon, and he wanted to get out. He wanted to retire, so I guess he could continue on with whatever he wanted to do in the paranormal world. So he retired in 1984. So I figured, and from what I understood, there was this program up at Fort Meade. So he retired in 1984. So from what I understand, the people in the unit at Fort Meade were waiting for orders to go someplace else and work. But the Defense Intelligence Agency, there was a gentleman there by the name of Dr. Jack Verona, who had funded Stanford Research Institute to do research in the paranormal. And Dr. Verona had a man working for him by the name of Dale Graff. Well, they were looking at the research side of remote viewing, and they were also looking at the foreign assessment, meaning what are other countries doing in the paranormal world, especially the Soviet Union. So what happened was, when General Stubblebine left in 1984, everybody thought the remote viewers would go away. Dr. Verona went to Congress and said, don't do away with the remote viewers, just transfer them from Army Intelligence into the Defense Intelligence Agency, which took about a year. For all of that to go through, took about 1985. That whole transfer took about a year. And then in 1986, early 1986, January or February, I was approached by Fort Meade to come and join the program. So that's how I got into the program. And when I went to the program, I assumed that I was going to do my automatic writing. However, they only had two methodologies. One was called coordinate remote viewing, and the other one was called written remote viewing. It was called extended remote viewing, which when I entered the unit, I did extended remote viewing. It's sort of like put yourself in a self-hypnotic state. You receive impressions, and then you come out and you draw pictures of your impressions, write a report, and hand it in. Now, when I went into the unit, they knew because I'm sure General Stubblebine told them I did automatic writing. I was a channelist, I guess a medium. And actually, right before I went into the unit, I had started giving readings, psychic readings, but it was very, very minimal. I didn't have a clientele, and I was probably giving readings for free. I can't remember, but it was just very minimal. I had started to do readings. But when I went into the unit, I was told that I had a bad habit, that the channeling or the automatic writing was a bad habit, and I was not allowed to do it. Mm-hmm. So I did extended remote viewing. Well, I don't know why they thought it was a bad habit, because people in the unit, they were very well aware of what channeling was. I think they thought I did trance channeling, something like Jane Roberts with the Seth, mm-hmm. which would mean where the entity takes over the body. Mm-hmm. But that never happened to me. But I don't think they knew. All they knew is I channeled and I wasn't allowed to do it. So for about 1.5 years, 2 years, I did extended remote viewing, and I did okay. And then management sort of changed. The operations officer, Skip Atwater, he retired. The commanding officer, Bill Ray, he had another assignment. And then my trainer, who really didn't want me to do automatic writing, he left for a new job. So it's sort of like these people left, and then we had new management. Well, the new boss by the name of Fern Galvin, he was there during the early years, in 1976, when the Army was using remote viewers on a part-time basis, where they could come in and remote view and then go back to their jobs. And Fern had come in, and he wasn't. Extended remote viewing happened before coordinate remote viewing. Although if you talk to the coordinate remote viewers, they act like that was there first, it's the only thing. But extended remote viewing was first, and then coordinate remote viewing came along. And it came along because Dr. Verona needed something concrete to go to Congress to get funded, because every time he would go and talk about psychics, he would be laughed at. So remote viewers sounded a little bit more favorable. And if they had a manual somehow explaining maybe more in scientific terms how it worked instead of the new age lingo, they were able to receive funding and not be laughed at so much. Mm-hmm. So the management changed. The management's changed in 1980, and about, I would say, probably 1987. Maybe I was there for 1.5 years. But the environment changed. I had a new boss. He told me I could do my automatic writing. And then we had Ed May come in from Stanford Research Institute. He was there, and I think Russell Targ and Hal Putoff sort of they left. So it set the scene. It was sort of like I was allowed to do what I do naturally. Well, so I started working with Fern, and as we started to work, he just wanted to see what I could do. But he gave me, there were hostages in Lebanon. And so we started to work hostages in Lebanon, and I think there was Terry Anderson, Terry Waite. So we were doing it almost like as a training target, just to see what I could come up with. Well, the information was pretty good, so we started to use hostages operationally. Well, then there was a Colonel Higgins. He was kidnapped by the Hezbollah in Lebanon, and we were called in. The remote viewers were called in to try to find Colonel Higgins, because he was kidnapped and he was probably very much hated, and and they were trying to get him out. They didn't want him killed. So we were brought in to work Higgins, and so I had placed him. So through my automatic writing, I was able to place Higgins at this location. I said, he's here. I just pointed to a location and I said, Higgins is here. Well, what they gave me was old imagery. And of course, the people in my unit said, they laughed and they said, there's nothing there but woods. But the analyst that we were working with at the Defense Intelligence Agency said, that's old imagery. And they kept the information. Well, about a month later, the terrorists let out they released a German hostage, and his last name was Cordes. So one of our analysts went to Germany to debrief Cordes. And what he wanted, and he asked Cordes, where are they keeping Higgins? And the guy pointed to the same, I guess he had the same frame of imagery, but he pointed to my location. And the DIA analyst said, but there's nothing there but woods. And Cordes said, no, they built a structure to hold Higgins there. So he was where I said he was. Mm-hmm. So that was a good success for the automatic writing. Well, after that, Dr. Verona said, call it WRV, written remote viewing. Okay. Now, a lot of people in the unit think that Fern, my boss, dubbed it written remote viewing, but it was actually Dr. Jack Verona that said, call it written remote viewing. So after that, I started to use my automatic writing in military operations. Now, what we found, the written remote viewing was good for accessing and describing individuals. It was good for, and what are their plans and intentions. It was good for describing what an individual looks like, their health status. I can remember I said one of the hostages Pohill would come out with a sore throat, and he came out with throat cancer. And the automatic writing was good for locations. So I did written remote viewing. We were doing locations, people, and we were doing it in an operational mode. We were looking at Gaddafi's chemicals. How was he getting chemicals into that? It was high. Nobody could ever confirm if Gaddafi had chemical weapons. If so, how was he bringing it in? Where were they kept? We were able to do a remote viewing session on that. We were able to locate one of the vessels in the Libyan Navy, and we think that they were doing it through a rendezvous through a ship. But
you actually named the ship. There was one letter that was off. I think you called it potato or something like that.
We called it potato, and it was batata. It was started with a B.
Right.
It was so, and we were having success with. I can remember I said that Terry Anderson was in the Bekaa Valley, and the analysts came back and they said, oh, he wouldn't be in the Bekaa Valley. That's not the terrorists' MO. Within less than 24 hours, they received an intelligence report that he was sighted that Anderson was sighted in the Bekaa Valley. Mm-hmm. And then I think at the end, we were kind of running out of steam with the hostages because we did it so many times. And we were waiting for them to come out. And I said they were going to come out during a September time period. They did, like September 3 years later, 2 or 3 years later. But I can remember right at the end when we were doing the hostages, I had come up with the information through the automatic writing. They said it came out like there was a man by the name of Jonathan Livingston that was going over to Beirut that would help in the release. And that he was going to negotiate and help in the release of the hostages. Well, when the Defense Intelligence Agency's analyst got a hold of that. They didn't know who Jonathan Livingston was. So they started to look through microfiche because they just wanted to know who was this guy. And they couldn't find any information on him. They didn't know who he was. They thought maybe he was in the military, maybe he was with State Department, but they couldn't find anything on him. Well, my report was sitting in the office of Colonel Higgins' wife. He had a wife, I believe her name was Robin, and she was also, I think, in the Marines, or she was in the military. So one of the analysts was in her office, and he saw my report sitting on her desk. And he said, "Who was Jonathan Livingston?" And she said, "Oh, he's a British envoy. He was just sent over to Beirut to help in the release of the hostages." So that answered that question for the analyst, but they said that because he was English, he wasn't in the the U.S. microfiche. Because at that time in the 80s, we didn't have the computers or the internet. So I guess in Terry Waite's book, he wrote a book when he was released, and he does name Jonathan Livingston as the man who he credits him for really breaking the barrier and getting these hostages out.
Right, and you precognitively got that data through automatic writing. You had written down Jonathan Livingston. It's pretty amazing.
Because it's writing. It's like writing, like the letters just come, it's like writing. Now, it's very verbal. Automatic writing is very verbal. It's phonetic. A lot of times the words won't come out right. Like I think potato came out potato instead of, I did a P instead of a B. And when I found the customs man, Charles Jordan, in Lovell, Wyoming, or near Lovell, Wyoming, I first named it Lowell, Lowell, Wyoming, instead of Lovell, Wyoming.
Just one letter
but
off.
It's close enough. It's close enough.
Absolutely. Let's take a little deeper dive into what the automatic writing process is like for you. And we can look at your time on the unit with some of these great examples. I'm guessing it's probably a little different for everybody, but for a typical automatic writing session where you're getting actionable intelligence for the military, are we talking about paragraphs of data, or is it just words here and there? How does it typically come through?
It depends on what the question is. Depends on what the question is. When you're doing locations, it's very simple. Like I think with Charles Jordan, he was the customs agent that they were trying to find. He went bad. I guess he was a rogue. They just asked, "Where's Charles Jordan?" And I got Lowell, Wyoming. It just came because that was the question. Where is he? And that's what I got.
So in that example, are you the one that's they call it probing the signal line, or do you have a monitor that's saying, try to get an answer for this question?
Well, that one I had a monitor. Then the monitor said, "Where's Charles Jordan?" And it was just that simple because that was the question and it just came out. It came out Lowell, Wyoming, and Fern, the monitor said, he said, "There's a Lowell, Massachusetts." And I said, "No, it's Wyoming." It was the flavor of Wyoming. You get a flavor. And that's more psychic. That's not automatic writing. And I said, "No, it's Wyoming." I didn't have a Massachusetts feeling. I had a Wyoming feeling, west. So he said, so from that, we went to, we had a book of maps. From there, we went to Wyoming. And he said, "There's a Lovell, Wyoming." And I just said, "Close enough." I don't want to, it just came out that. So the way it came out, I just have to honor the way it came out. You can't beat around the bush.
Right. Trust the data.
Trust the data. Yeah. Now, sometimes, like if they're asking for health statuses, like a lot of people wanted to know about the health statuses of the hostages because they were afraid that Terry Anderson, actually, he was the most hated. So I think they were afraid he was going to get killed. So we would do health statuses. Well, of course, then I'm getting paragraphs, then I'm getting the information.
Mm-hmm. Now, when I'm doing remote viewing and I get words or sometimes sentences, I hear it not with my ears, but sort of in the center of my head, as if a voice is talking. Is that how the automatic writing comes through for you, or is it actually on the page where you're actually seeing?
It's actually on the page where I see it. Although I know what you're talking about because sometimes I get that too.
Right.
I understand what you're saying because sometimes that happens to me. I just feel information is out there. Mm-hmm. And when you're a remote viewer, if you're working psychically, you're being asked the question. And I think to work psychically or to work as a remote viewing, it's a mental feat. The information comes here. You get it mentally. And then the automatic writing, the tarot cards, the CRV, the crystal ball, the extended remote viewing, all of that is the manifestation of the information that the mind has already grasped.
So it sounds like when you're doing automatic writing, you don't actually know what the data is until you've already written it out. Is that right?
Sometimes. Okay. But then sometimes it'll, like you said, it comes to the head. So sometimes it will come in my mind and then I see it on paper. Mm-hmm. Now, when I first started automatic writing, I wanted to see it all on paper because I didn't trust myself. Mm-hmm. I needed to see it on paper or somehow I would clear where I needed to read it on paper. But now, being more experienced, if it pops into my head first, then, I don't need to, I can move on to other things. I don't need to see it in writing.
Right. Let's talk about the beginning stages of automatic writing. As I think I might have said, I watched a couple of your interviews and you inspired me to start learning automatic writing. And I took a course and I've started the process. I'm just getting into it. And the approach that I'm using is I just start writing for 20 minutes and I don't feel like I'm really getting any actual data for the most part, although sometimes I kind of check out and I couldn't actually tell you what I've written. I should probably go back and look at it. But I'm wondering for you, what was the early stages like? You're just sort of learning to trust the process. Are you just sitting there and writing and then trusting that something real is going to come through, or are you waiting until you feel it coming through?
No, you're right. You're right.
You start writing.
Wait. You start writing, and you start writing. And when I was writing and I wasn't receiving anything, then I had to open myself up and I started to ask questions verbally.
Okay.
That is when I started to receive messages. Okay. I mean, I can remember just sitting there writing and nothing and trying to read, am I getting something? But as soon as I became a part of it, like, hey, are there any messages? Are there any messages for my family? Are there any messages for me? Are there any messages when I started to become part of it? And I can remember, I think my first thing was something about my mother. And then I think it was a message about my mother. And and whatever the answer was, I kept writing it over and over and over again. Well, then I had to shift and I had to ask what do you mean by this concerning my mother? And then more information would come. So it's almost like you have to be part of the process. Ask questions, look at the answer, say thank you. Oh, thank you. Can you tell me a little bit more about this? What does this mean? Go on to another question if you have to. And you verbally say it. You become part of the process.
Mm-hmm. And during those times, what's that?
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. So when you're asking these questions, I know when I'm doing a session and I'm probing, like I'll get an image and I'll probe that image. The data will just come to me, and I write it down. I couldn't actually tell you how it comes. I think it's like a knowing. It's like an instantaneous knowing, and then I'm writing that knowing down. Really, at the same time, actually, as I'm thinking about it, I get the knowing as I'm writing it. Is that what it's like for you? Are you writing out the responses, and then you're looking at the paper? Oh, that's the answer. Is there a split-second delay before you are aware of the answer because you have to wait till it's written down, or are you knowing it as you're writing it down?
No, there's a split. No, there's a delay. There's a delay.
Okay.
Of course, there's a delay because you're asking the question, waiting for it, and of course, there's a delay.
But the delay being that you actually are waiting until your left brain actually reads the words that you've just written. Oh, there's the answer. I'm reading the answer, and that's the answer. Is that what it's like? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So with your work in the military, I know you said it really depends on what the target is, as opposed to whether it's a 2-word answer. Were there times where you did the automatic writing for the remote viewing unit where there was just pages of data?
Oh, sure. Sure.
Wow.
Yeah, and that was mostly hostages' health status, where they were, what they're going through. I can remember Dr. Verona ran me on Gorbachev. He first came into power, the Soviet Union president. I didn't know it was Gorbachev, but he had come in, and Gorbachev really wanted to open up to the Western world, and that was a shock to us. So I guess Dr. Verona was like, tell me about what's in this, envelope, and I've picked up a male leader, and then just writing, could he be trusted, which I felt he could. Mm-hmm. And they said, why can we trust it? And I said, I think you can trust him. And I said, he reads the Bible. I could remember that. So that's an indication, if he reads, you're telling, so that was an indication. And then I can remember we were going through the Politburo of the Soviet Union, and that was just reams and reams of information, individuals and
it's all guided by questions, as you said. It's kind of a question and then an answer, and then either you or the monitor might have another question to kind of drill deep into the data. Is that right?
Yeah. As long as I'm in the blind, I think I can remember when I was doing the Soviet leaders, they kept wanting to know about one man. I couldn't get anything on him. And I said, well, his health is bad. Well, I think he died. So it was like I couldn't get anything on him, and he didn't matter anyway because he had passed on. So somebody else, he wasn't going to be that much of an influence because he wasn't feeling well, and then he passed. But
okay.
I can remember that.
You said you were in the blind. I actually hadn't occurred to me, but I would think that if I had to guess, I'd say a lot of the sessions you all did weren't blind, or were they mostly blind, meaning that you, the remote viewer, didn't have any idea of what you were looking at, or because it was operational, sometimes did you know the target and you went ahead and did it anyway?
It's better if you don't know. It was much better when I worked in the blind. Mm-hmm. It was much better because I could go straight to the answer. When I was front-loaded, they call it front-loading. If I was told something before I wrote, I really couldn't get the answer. It's better just to be in the blind. I worked it both ways. Mm-hmm. And by the end, I was just arguing I didn't want information.
Right. So
it works better now. if I'm working a target over and over again and they want more information, there is going to come a time where I'm going to know something. Mm-hmm. But it's a very delicate balance as to when to tell me something, when not to. But remote viewing actually works better when the remote viewer doesn't know anything. Most of my successes were good. I received most of my successes because I was in the blind. I wasn't front loaded. When I was front loaded, I didn't have.
So what's an example of a way a remote viewing session starts out when you are not front loaded? Does the monitor just start you off with a question, or how do you know where to start? Did you get coordinate numbers for those type of things? Okay.
No, they would just say, tell me about. No, it would be more or less. You would just get the target number. They would just say, give me information about the target in the envelope, and then I would just go from there.
Okay. So sometimes there'd be a target in an envelope, and that's how they would reference it.
Yeah.
And did it sounds like maybe they use target numbers sometimes, or
target numbers, whatever.
Okay.
I think they used the year 8801, 8802, something like that. Right. I never got wrapped around. I never needed. To me, you just go to the target. Just go to the target.
Just the intention itself is enough.
The intention.
Right. Can we talk a little bit about kind of just stepping back from the remote viewing unit part of it, but just in general, what is automatic writing? I'm understanding from your other interviews that, at least for you, your guides, which I guess one way to describe a guide would be a helping spirit of some type, they're an essential part of the automatic writing. Is that right?
Yes.
And can you talk a little bit more about how I guess you could call it a relationship, the relationship with what you call your guides developed? When did you start to be aware of them, and how did that start to play into
when I started automatic writing, after I read the Ruth Montgomery book, I must have been 29 years old.
Okay.
And I started the automatic writing. I knew about the guides, the spirits, and the help. And I think it just and there was an opening. I mean, you open up more. Your chakras open up. It's more like a spiritual journey, spiritual lessons, which I couldn't. You don't bring that into. I couldn't bring that into the military unit because right. A lot of these people were not practicing psychics when they showed up in the unit. Mm-hmm. These were people that I guess they took a psychology test. Somebody thought they would be good at remote viewing, but these were people that never explored. They were taught I always call remote viewing a technique. It's just a technique mm-hmm. on how to get an answer.
Yeah, it's interesting. As I learn more and more about remote viewing and get more and more practical experience with it, I have the impression that there is a guiding intelligence, that's what I call it, in remote viewing, that there's something between you and the data that I believe is intelligent and that is, like if you work in a project as a group, one person gets this set of data, mm-hmm. another person gets this set of data, and a lot of times they complement one another. So I think that what I'm calling the guided intelligence is just another way of, it could be another way of saying the guides that you're mm-hmm. referring to in your automatic writing.
Yeah. I mean, coordinate remote viewing, I think they have something called a signal line, access the signal line. Right. I mean, what's that signal line? How do they know that signal line? Could be an angel, could be sure. a spirit. What do you know? What do they know what that signal line is?
Yeah, we know a lot. We know a lot less than what we know about how it all works. That's for sure. So, in 1995, the whole remote viewing project was closed down. But I'm guessing you didn't stop your automatic writing work at that point. Where did you take things after the unit closed down?
Well, I was working for the federal government, I think, oh my goodness, 78. I was working for the federal government 9, 10, or 11 years before I even went into the remote viewing program, which I was in for 9 years. So when I came out, I still needed to put time into the federal government if I wanted to get a pension or to retire with benefits. So what they did is they just put people back into the. They kept us and gave us jobs at the Defense Intelligence Agency. So I went back into headquarters at Bolling Air Force Base, and I became an analyst. That's what I was always an analyst. When I worked for Army Intelligence before the psychic program and after the program, I was an analyst. So they give you an account and then you write papers on it. So I went back to the unit. I went back to the Defense Intelligence Agency. I received a job as an analyst. I worked, I think, Russian and Chinese defense industries. And I stayed there. But during the time that I was at the unit and after I left the unit, I was giving readings. So I would give readings at night or part-time or during the weekends. So I just continued doing my readings. And so that's what I did. And then I retired in 2010 from the Defense Intelligence Agency. And I did some work for Ed May. He was Dr. Ed May. He was our contractor. I went out to California for a while and stayed with him. I ran a project for him. Right now, I teach at the Monroe Institute. Joe McMonagle asked me to teach the last class of the Remote Viewing 2 class. And I do my readings. I do my psychic readings. I write. I wrote a psychic thriller with Victor Rubel, who was he was part of the the Soviet Union psychic program. He was born in the Ukraine. He came to the United States. Ed May. Okay, this is what happened. When the Soviet Union fell in 1991, Ed May, who was our contractor, came to DIA and said, "You're going to give me money and I'm going over," because he wanted to find out what were the Soviets doing in the field. He wanted to meet their scientists. And I think Ed, over the years, made many trips over to Russia. And eventually he met the colonel who was in charge of the Russian remote viewer, of the Soviet remote viewers, and he met them. So there were 2 books that were written. One was called ESP Wars, East versus West, and that was the American version. And then there was a book written called ESP Wars, West versus East, and that was written by the Soviets, by the Russians in Russia, in the Russian language. So Ed kind of became friendly with them. I think Joe McMonagle went with him one time. So when these books were written, okay, and then we were able to get out of. There was a woman that we were able to. When Gorbachev took over the Soviet Union, he was letting a lot of people leave the Soviet Union because it was poor. And he was allowing a lot of Jewish people to leave the Soviet Union. And he didn't mind because it was very poor. People were hungry. Our agency identified a woman by the name of Larissa, who was living over in Israel, but she had worked with the Soviet Union scientists in the parapsychology field. We were able to identify her, and we brought her to the United States from Israel to work with Ed May. And she worked with Ed, and then she brought a Victor over from Russia. So now Victor's living in the United States and he's teaching at the language school in Monterey. But Victor and I wrote a psychic novel thriller that we're trying to get published because it talks about, it's a fiction book, but it's based on history. And it shows how the United States used their remote viewers, which was very different on how the Russians, how the Soviet Union used their remote viewers. Now, because of these two books that were written, in 2015, we got invited to go to Russia. Victor served as our interpreter, but we went over to Russia in 2015. We were invited by a newspaper, and they gave a reception in honor of the United States remote viewers and the Soviet remote viewers. So when I went over to Russia in 2015, I met with their psychics or remote viewers, and we asked them what methodology how are they teaching people how to remote view? How are they teaching people to be psychic? And they're channeling. What they're doing is channeling.
Wow.
So they weren't using coordinate remote viewing or extended remote viewing. They were doing channeling.
Wow.
So that was like, so that's what they were doing. So they believe in the spirit world. I mean, so that kind of surprised me because they were, so she said, no, we just teach people how to, they call it open up the channel. So since I retired, I was able to go to Russia. It was a trip of a lifetime, and I was able to, I worked for Ed May. I still work for Ed May sometimes. I do my readings. I wrote a novel with Ed May, or with Victor. It's a fiction. It's a young adult, and it's based on history around the fall of the Berlin Wall. And right now, I'm getting my children's stories into animation, and hopefully that will be done in a few months.
Wow, amazing. There's so much there that you just mentioned that is just fascinating. This book with Victor you've written, it sounds great. I'd like to get my hands on it. When do you think that might be available for people?
I don't know. I want to get it through one more good edit. I want to get it through one more, which I'm very close to doing. It's just a matter of the book is written. I just want to get it through one more edit. If I don't get it published, I'll probably self-publish it.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, you mentioned that the Russian scientists, when they were practicing the remote viewing, that they were channeling. Was that automatic writing, or were they just letting it come through vocally, or a mixture?
No, it was automatic writing.
Wow. Oh, and I wonder, do you have any idea how they stumbled upon that? Probably through similar ways that you did, just looking at the existing literature and then following in previous people's footsteps.
I think they just hired people that were psychic. Mm. See, when the United States, when Stanford Research Institute, when Russell Targan helped put off, when remote viewing was first being looked at by these two scientists back in prior to 76, 72 time period, and SRI, they were looking for psychic. They needed to work with people who had the ability. They went after people like Ingo Swann, Uri Geller, Hallett Hammond, Pat Price. These people had a track record. They were known psychics. They had a track record. So SRI brought them in. And when SRI needed new psychics, they would go to San Francisco. Well, SRI is out in Stanford, California, which is close to San Francisco. They would go up to San Francisco and interview and test all the hippies left over from the 60s. So I think Stanford, when they brought in people that were psychic, they had these abilities. The way that we did it was because you couldn't advertise this job out on, it's not like you couldn't advertise this job out on the street. our program was a special access program. It was called a SAP, special access program. You just didn't bring people in, so we had people in the unit who they would go out and they would say, hey, I think you're going to be I think you have this ability to remote view. So they would bring them in the unit. They would give them a Myers-Briggs personality test. And if you scored a certain way, then they said, oh, you're going to be a good remote viewer. And then they would bring people in, and then people would come in, and they had no exposure to maybe the psychic spiritual world. They weren't looking for it. They just happened to show up and told they could become good remote viewers. So they learned the technique. They learned the technique on how to remote view. Anything else scared them. Anything else bothered them because it went against their belief system, because we happen to have some Mormons in there. So I think if the unit would have went after people who maybe have had experiences, that maybe read a book on, what does this all mean? But they were just bringing people in. Like, I think one man brought in his neighbor because they were good buddies. Hey, I think you'll make a good move. So they were given the Myers-Briggs personality test. Now somebody decided that people that were perceptive and not so much judging, I guess the perceptive people make better remote viewers than the people that are considered judging or judgmental. Well, then that became a hard, fast rule. You look for people that are perceptive. Well, in the long run, what you really found out was you can train people that are perceptive and they will get it right away. But the judging person or the judgmental person comes in and they want to do things more their way, and they sort of end up, it may take longer for them to catch on, but they make better remote viewers. Now, what Stanford found out was they did a test on airplane pilots. Every airplane pilot that was perceptive, they would go into the cockpit, and when they started that airplane, they read the manual, and they worked that airplane just like the manual said. When you had a judgmental person come in, they tossed the manual aside, they started pressing buttons, and they started to figure things out for themselves. When there was an airplane accident or an incident, they found that the people that were judging could make better decisions better than the people that were perceptive that went right by the rules. So we did a Myers-Briggs personality test, and if you were perceptive, you got in. But I think Stanford, and I think they had a better way to go. And Ed May also devised his way of testing psychics, which was actually just putting the picture in the envelope and saying what was in there, and having the. So I don't know. I don't know what I'm trying to say. I don't know.
It sounds like maybe what you're saying is that if the government had to do the program over again, you probably have some advice for them as far as the criteria to look for in terms of who would be potential viewers, and furthermore, someone who already has been shown an interest in developing psychic skills or is interested in those type of spiritual kind of.
If they had a little bit exposure. I mean, the Washington D.C. area, there's a whole underground of psychics and spiritualists and groups and bookstores. Which really made it difficult for me, because when I went in there, I was the witch. They actually called me a witch.
Wow.
I was the witch. Yeah, they thought I was a witch. So, yeah, and I think we had one guy that was Mormon, and then he was bringing in Mormons because he would go to church on Sundays at the Mormon church in Annapolis. And if new recruits were coming in, if new military people were coming in and they were at the Mormon church, he would bring them into the unit. So there was the way we were bringing them in. I don't think if I want somebody that has an interest, that knows what, maybe read a book.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you were a witch, you were certainly a good witch, because you have some amazing results during your time in the session there, or in the unit there, which is unarguable in terms of how your automatic writing method served you and served a unit. So you did readings throughout your time there, privately, and you're still doing readings. Can you tell us a little bit about what a reading is? Is reading involve automatic writing, and then
Yeah, sure. Well, I picked up different tools over the years. I do a little bit of basic numerology. I do a little bit of aura reading, trying to figure out people emit a certain aura. If it's a certain color, it means something about their personality. I even do tarot cards, but I do the automatic writing for mediumship. Sometimes I do the automatic writing if people request it. It depends on what the question is. But it's mostly, I think, when people want to connect with someone on the other side, or they want to know what goes on, maybe after death. So yeah, I do the automatic writing. I just picked up different tools. I remember there was a time I was doing nothing but automatic writing. Mm-hmm. And then I got into the tarot cards, and then somebody taught me a little bit about numerology. So for all of the years that I've been in it, for over 30, 35 years, and you just pick up different tools, and that's what I do. So I do numerology, I do tarot, I do automatic writing.
If someone wants to get a reading from you, I'm assuming there's a way for them to contact you. I can leave some kind of contact information in the bio underneath the video or the podcast information.
I will give you my cell phone number, and I'll give you my email.
Okay, great. And do you teach, you said
Yes.
you teach remote viewing at the Monroe Institute, which I actually saw Joe years ago. I went to one of I can't remember how many days it was, but near the end of I guess it was the Gateway program they called it. Joe came in and he talked about his viewing of Mars, and that's probably where I first heard of remote viewing, and I always remember that. So I think it's really great you're teaching there, and there actually sounds like they have a specific remote viewing program. Is that how it is?
Joe did start a remote viewing class.
Okay.
Yeah.
And are you teaching automatic writing for your portion of that?
No, I'm just teaching remote viewing. I just go in and not so much automatic writing, but we talk about the protocols of remote viewing, the type of information one can receive. It's mostly how the different methodologies, the protocol. It's not so much written remote viewing. It's, what constitutes a good remote viewing session. Mm-hmm. You don't do front loading, and you follow the protocols. See, what makes remote viewing is the protocols. But as far as the methodologies, you can't tell somebody what methodology to use. You can be trained in extended remote viewing and coordinate remote viewing. Sometimes people come out and they have their own way. They have their own way of remote viewing. And I think this is what Ed May felt, and so did Fern Galvin. They were like, if you need to stand on your head to give me the right answer, stand on your head. You can't tell anybody how to remote view. That's something personal, and that's your inner workings.
So the protocol would be you do the session blind, you sit down with an intention to view something. There's a goal for the session. Is that another protocol? What are the other ones?
And then you come out and you write a report, you do your sketches, you hand it in, and then you get immediate feedback. If you can get immediate feedback, you get immediate feedback.
Okay. So whatever methodology you use is,
it's
the proof is in the pudding.
Well, yeah, not the methodology. It's the steps.
Right. So have you taught automatic writing at all
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what I tell people is they all start out just by writing, and it's somehow you have to make the connection with that intelligence, whatever it would be, whatever you feel it would be. It could be your higher self, it could just be a higher intelligence, it could be spirit. Once you make that connection, I always at the beginning, I just always asked the question out loud. It was like I was talking, like, well, what do you mean? Like, okay, suppose I would get a message. I would say, do you say this? And then it would say, yes. What do you mean by this? And then it's more information. It's like you have to engage. But when you sit there and just write, it's not going to happen. But if you sit there and write and you start getting engaged, that connection, once it's made, you'll start getting your messages, whatever they may be.
So again, you're going back to the importance in automatic writing of, as you said, engaging. So you're looking at what you've just written, and then you're asking questions to your guides, to the source where it's coming from, and that asking questions is what really kicks the process into gear.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah. Because I remember just sitting there writing and nothing. And then something came over me and I said, wait a minute, let's ask a question. Is someone, can I make a connection? I said, can I make a connection? Yes. Okay, let's make the connection. Are there any messages for me? Well, what do you mean by this? I think they told me something about my mother, and it was like, okay, tell me more. It's just you become engaged with it, and then it happens.
Mm-hmm.
And you
do you
can't
have
be
any
in fear
what's
of
that?
it. A lot of people are in fear of it. A lot of people are just in fear.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any special things that help you get into the automatic writing process more easily? For instance, do you meditate beforehand, or does the room have to be in really low light? I know the guy that I was studying with, I took a brief class. He encouraged people to wake up in the morning, and before you turn on the lights or anything, get in front of a piece of paper in really low light. You do some prayers and that kind of thing, and just start writing, and you can get the process started that way. Is there any?
That's true. That's
Okay.
true. You get the first thing in the morning, you'll get your best automatic, right? Yeah, that's true.
Mm-hmm.
Automatic writing, it's psychic. So, what did they find out whenever the scientists would study remote viewing? They can't tell you what kind of goes on in the brain, but they can tell you certain things that make it very conducive to remote view. You need a quiet space, a semi-dark space. It's the same with the automatic writing. It's, clear your mind, be relaxed. It's the same, no matter what methodology you're using. If you're performing a psychic feat, there are certain things that if you do or use, it makes it very conducive to help gain information. But yes, in automatic writing, the morning, whoever your teacher is, that is correct.
Have you? Do you have any advice for anyone who is maybe an active remote viewer, maybe someone who's been trained in CRV or another method, and they're like, boy, Angela got some great results, and I'd like to maybe expand my skill set. What's some suggestions you have to get started exploring automatic writing for remote viewing?
I always tell people there's books out, and I always tell people to go on the internet and just buy a book on channeling. And there's a couple of books out. One is called Intro to Channeling, or the Beginner's Book to Channeling. But anything that is very you're at the beginning stages of learning. I always tell people to go to the internet and buy a book on how to channel. That's the first thing. And then whenever they say that they try it, again, I tell people engage. Like, in other words, they just want to sit there and write in their mind. And I'm like, you need to engage in it to get that connection.
So ask questions.
Ask questions and talk like you're talking to your best friend. And then I tell them and I also encourage people to, another way that really can open up people to channel is find another modality. Buy a deck of tarot cards. You'd be surprised how tarot cards can open you up. I didn't read tarot cards for many years because I would buy I bought a simple deck. It never did anything for me. And then I bought a deck. It was called the Mythic Tarot. And that kind of opened me up to more. It was sort of like, whoa. Once I started to use that book, it kind of opened me up. And I was able to channel, maybe so much not with the automatic writing, but there was another way of channeling. But just a modality, there's just open up to, there's tarot cards, there's runes, there's the pendulum, can be very powerful. A lot of people use the pendulum. I mean, they can feel the difference between yes or no. It's like, just open yourself up. When you open yourself up to the universe or to this type of intelligence out there, it's different energies, and you need to experience the different energies and what they mean. And then it's sort of like you go through a process where you just kind of open up, and then it just becomes it's a process. And then at some point you just know you're doing it. At some point you're doing it.
It's like a skill like any other that you build.
Yeah. I mean, I've talked to people who had started channeling, that have opened up, and they'll say, I thought I was crazy. I'm like, that's it. When you get to the point where you're a little confused or like, whoa, something just happened here, then you're there. And you're there.
Very good. Well, I really appreciate you going over more in depth about your experiences both within the unit and with automatic writing, Angela. It's fascinating, and I can't wait to see your fiction novel with Victor, however it ends up being published. It sounds like it's going to be very interesting to read on multiple levels. And anything else that you want to share before we close down the podcast for today?
No, I hope I was clear enough. It's hard. Sometimes it's hard to answer the questions when it's, we're talking.
No, very interesting and thought-provoking and inspiring as a remote viewer. You're someone that used an approach that's different than what we typically hear of in remote viewing, and there's no argument with the data that you got from that. So as someone who's personally interested in exploring consciousness and exploring different ways to perceive reality to help us understand ourselves and our place in the world, your voice is definitely one that I think everyone is interested in hearing from. So thanks again. And
thank you, Darby. I appreciate you having me on. I just appreciate it. Thank you.
My pleasure.